Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Starking AM0385. This watch is available from Starking official store on AliExpress for €167. So firstly, let's look at the box that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the other items one gets with the piece. So the watch comes in this cardboard watch box. One removes the tray, and the watch sits in a foam cutout panel in the base as one would expect. Although basic, it does suffice in protecting the watch in shipping, and I think it's acceptable to use a basic cardboard watch box, bearing in mind this is a low tier price point piece at €167. This is the warranty card that comes to the watch, and as usual the watch is covered by a 12-month international warranty. One also gets this Starking tag, and on the reverse it has the full reference number of the piece, which is abbreviated to AM0385, and also the barcode. This is the spring bar tool that comes to the watch. And lastly, one also gets the Starking branded microfiber polishing cloth. I always think it's a nice touch to get a branded microfiber polishing cloth, irrespective of the price point of a piece. So, with regards to the specifications of the piece, this is the Starking AM0385. We have a 44.3mm case diameter. We have a lug-to-lug measurement of 47.5mm, a thickness of 14.3mm. The integrated lug width at the widest point of the lugs and the integrated silicone rubber strap is 26mm, and the silicone rubber strap tapers from 26 at the lugs down to 19.6 at the 2-button push deployant. The deployant clasp is signed to a high standard with the Starking emblem engraved and also the Starking logo, and it's black PVD coated to a good standard. Good firm resistance to the 2-button push triggers of the deployant, and the quality of the PVD coating is good. There's no silver areas exposed to the stainless steel brushed satin finish to the top side, underside and flanks, no sharp edges, no sharp corners, and the hinge pins are tight enough. So the quality of the brushed satin finishing beneath the black PVD coating is good, and the quality of the PVD coating itself is also good. It snaps sharp with a nice positive click, and there are plenty of holes in the strap to allow for fine tuning the length. It will fit up to a maximum 8-inch wrist. With regards to the rest of the specification, we have a Hardlex crystal. Now this is disappointing at this price point. At €167, one would expect a sapphire crystal with clear AR coating. Hardlex is really a compromise between using mineral crystal and sapphire. It really sits between the two, because effectively Hardlex is chemically treated mineral crystal to make it more scratch resistant, but it's not as hard and scratch resistant as sapphire crystal. Now, credit where credit's due. Although it doesn't have AR coating, Starking have done a good job of finishing the edge. If you look at the bevels, they've machined an octagonal shape to the edge of the Hardlex crystal, and they've also well machined the bezel because it has scalloped cutouts which match the 8 octagonal sides. So this is something I haven't seen done on a crystal before, and Starking have done an excellent job because there's no sharp edges or sharp points to the edge of the bevels on the Hardlex crystal, and it is very aesthetically pleasing the way the bevels catch the light, and also there are no sharp edges to the bezel or sharp corners, and the scallops are very well machined. So the interface between the edge of the scallops and also the facets of the bevels are very good. So it is very eye-catching and very aesthetically pleasing, but it's just a shame that it doesn't have AR coating, because there is a lot of glare and highly reflective nature of the applied indices, which are rose gold, and also the silver mirror polished hands. Now the hands are well proportioned, but however I think the dial could be further improved with better symmetry. Now I appreciate this is an original design from Starking. They haven't produced an homage, and they've tried to come up with their own original dial, and it is an open heart dial. As you can see, one can see all the way through to the back because it has an exhibition case back. I personally dislike the look of it, but however this is subjective. Some collectors might appreciate the originality of this design rather than it being an homage. I do think it's innovative to use the octagonal facets on the bevels to the crystal, and it's just a shame they hadn't used sapphire rather than Hardlex. With regards to the crown, it's knurled finish, also black PVD coated to a high standard, and embossed with the Starking emblem to a good standard. It's a push-pull crown which provides an effective hermetic seal to 50 meters. So in the closed position, one can manually wind the Miyota caliber 821A to top it up to its maximum 42-hour power reserve. It does feel smooth to manually wind, although it's not as pleasant and smooth as an NH38 or an NH35A, which you'll be familiar with. I personally dislike the feeling of manually winding Miyota movements such as the 821A. It just doesn't feel as smooth to manually wind as a Seiko movement such as the NH35A, although it is acceptable. So push-pull crown, one can manually wind it in the closed position, and then pulling it out to the final click position is the time setting position. Now, the positive of the 821A is, like the 8215, which it's based upon, the latest versions have hacking. Early versions of the 8215 and early versions of the 821A didn't have hacking, so the second hand continued to sweep around the dial even when the crown was pulled out to the time setting position. So it's good that this has hacking. That is a notable enhancement over earlier versions. So with regards to time setting, there is some back play, and this is a characteristic of the 8215 and also this 821A. When I rotate the crown clockwise and anti-clockwise, if you look closely, you can see there is significant back play, both clockwise and anti-clockwise. The minute hand doesn't immediately respond. There is some play in the crown, and that means one has to rotate the crown clockwise and anti-clockwise more in order to take up the back play and get the minute hand to respond. So it is slack. With an NH38 or an NH35A, it doesn't have that back play. When one rotates the crown, the minute hand responds immediately. So this is something I dislike about Miyota 8000 series movements such as the 8215 and this 821A, the back play, as you can see, and it is significant, so that's something to bear in mind. Pushing it back in restarts the movements, and the second hand begins to sweep around the dial once again. So the push-pull crown does work okay. It's not as smooth to manually wind as a Seiko NH35A, and one also has to put up with the back play, so that's something to bear in mind. So with regards to the rest of the specification, I'll show you the case back. We have a screwed down exhibition case back, which is glazed with mineral crystal, and it's also decorated in gilt with the Starking emblem in the centre, and they've also added some finishing to the circumference. Personally, I think it would look better if they deleted the Starking gilt emblem and also the decoration around the circumference and just had a clear, undecorated exhibition case back, because that would give a better view of the movement, because the 821A is a decorated version of the 8215, so it would be nice to see it. I think it's obscured by the gilt finishing and the gilt emblem in the centre. By looking at it objectively, it is a low profile screwed down exhibition case back with the 4 flat head screws, and again the quality of the black PVD coating is done to a high standard. There are no silver areas of brushed satin finished stainless steel beneath it, so they deserve credit because the PVD coating is done to a good standard and the quality of the finishing to the case back is good. The underside to the head of the piece, which is effectively the screw down case back, doesn't have any sharp edges to the undercut of the case. The flanks don't have any sharp corners, so it is well deburred and well finished. Right, so I'll give you a wrist shot and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now, this is on the maximum extension, the last 2 holes in the strap, and as you can see, I'm pleased to report it fits my 8-inch wrist easily. I can in fact slide an index finger underneath the bracelet and 2 button push deployants, so no problems whatsoever. If you have a larger wrist size, this will fit up to an 8-inch wrist comfortably. Now, it does wear with wrist presence because it's a 44.3mm head of the piece, so it is large, but it's deceptively short in terms of the lug to lug. It's 47.5. As you'll know from my previous reviews, the perfect lug to lug measurement is 48mm, regardless of whether you have a 6 to 7-inch wrist or a 7 to 8-inch wrist respectively. At 47.5, it's only half a millimetre below the perfect lug to lug. It is a tall piece and it does feel top heavy on wrist, despite only weighing 116 grams on this silicone rubber integrated strap. Now, I would say to you, this is best suited to collectors with a larger wrist of 7 to 8 inches. It goes without saying, if you have a smaller wrist of 6 to 7 inches, you may find the 44.3mm head of the piece to be too large and wear with too much wrist presence. It is a tall piece at 14.3, and therefore it's not going to easily slip underneath shirt cuffs if you wear business shirts. 13mm is the sweet spot. Anything below 13mm easily slides underneath a shirt cuff. At 14.3, this is tall and it does feel top heavy, especially on the silicone rubber strap. So that's something to note. It's a tall piece and it does wear with wrist presence, best suited to a 7 to 8 inch wrist, although it does feel comfortable because it is only 116 grams. With regards to the taper, I think they've made the correct decision. 26mm, tapering down to 19.6 at the 2-button push deployment. It does have a nice taper, it's not too aggressive, and the 26mm integrated lug width does balance the 44.3mm head of the piece. I think it would look better if they'd reduce the proportions to 40 or 41, because 44 really is a large piece, even on my 8-inch wrist, as you can see. But however, some collectors might like the aesthetic of a large tall piece with wrist presence. So comfortable piece to wear, wrist presence is good but top heavy, and therefore it will be uncomfortable to wear for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day. With regards to the silicone rubber strap, it's actually very soft and supple, so it's not going to require any breaking in. It's softer than FKM fluorine rubber, or alternatively vulcanized rubber, and it is very well finished. Very flexible, especially around the deployment end where the holes are, and the underside is perfectly smooth, so it does feel very smooth against the wrist and comfortable, and nice attention to detail because it is embossed with Starking and also the Starking emblem on both sides of the strap, as you can see. So it's a well finished silicone rubber strap, very flexible, and it tapers in thickness. It's thick at the integrated lug end and it gradually tapers down in width and thickness down to the 2-button push deployment. Right, so let's do a loom test and we'll see how the loom performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, it is immediately disappointing. Now, first of all, there's a mismatch in terms of brightness. They've clearly applied more layers of green Luminova, it's not C3 Super Luminova, on these skeletonized hands. The other thing is it's difficult to differentiate between the hour and minute hand because the arrowhead tips to the skeletonized hands are similar in proportion. The minute hand and also the hour hand have similar shaped and similar size arrowheads, and there is room for improvement on this. Now, on a positive note, they have also loomed the arrowhead on the sweeping second hand, but as you can see, the applied indices, which are infilled with green Luminova, have faded immediately to nothing. So this indicates that they've applied 2 to 3 layers of Luminova versus 5 to 6 layers, which is the industry standard. On the skeletonized hands, it clearly does look like 5 to 6 layers because, of course, it's glowing brighter and continuing to glow for a longer length of time. So there really is room for improvement. Now, I appreciate it's a skeletonized dial, and there is some difficulty with applied indices on skeletonized dials and skeletonized chapter rings because, of course, the indices can't be as deep as a conventional dial, and therefore it's difficult to apply 5 to 6 layers, but they really should have applied deeper indices to the skeletonized dial and therefore applied 5 to 6 layers, because as you can see, it's pointless having 3 to 4 layers of Luminova, which is very weak. It needs the potency of the exciter in order to glow brightly as per the hands. So disappointing performance, and I think there's room for improvement, and also bearing in mind the price points, we're not looking at a piece which is €50, this is €167, and therefore this is unacceptable performance. One should have C3 Super Luminova at this price point, or alternatively BGW9 Super Luminova. Right, so let's discuss the movement use. So this uses the Miyota Caliber 821A. The 821A is effectively a decorated version of the 8215, which you'll be familiar with, and the 8215 is a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement, made in Japan, in use since 1977. So the 821A visually is different because it has a cut-out rotor. The 8215 has a solid rotor, but on the 821A you're looking at, they have a cutout. They skeletonise the rotor. The other notable difference is on the bridges to the movements. They are decorated with milled stripes. On the 8215, the bridges are plain and undecorated. They're matte silver, but on the 821A, they milled stripes to add some interest to the movement. It's decorated, but the architecture of both the 821A and the 8215 are the same. It has 21 joules. It runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 3 Hz. 42-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable, and it has hand binding and hacking, and that's something to note. Early versions of the 8215, which this is based upon, and also the 821A, didn't have hacking, and that was a main negative of the 8000 series, but Miyota have recently updated the 8215 and also the 821A you're looking at, and it now has hacking, so one can set the time precisely to the second. The stated accuracy of the 821A is -20 to +40 seconds per day, so a rather wide accuracy range. Now this one is running at +20, which is fast. And even though it's within the -20 to +40 seconds per day stated accuracy, I regard +20 to be unacceptable, because it is possible to regulate the 821A to within ±10 seconds per day. +20 really isn't good enough. And at €167, one would expect to see a movement regulated to ±10 versus +20. It's far too fast. Now there are some negatives to the 821A, which also applied to the 8215, which it's based upon. The main negative is the noisy rotor. The 8000 series of Miyota calibers are known for having a noisy rotor. One can hear the rotor spinning both clockwise and anti-clockwise on the wrist. It's audible. And this is something that the higher grades of Miyota movements, the premium 9000 series, such as the 9039 and the 9015, they do not have noisy rotors. The other negative to the 8000 series, such as this 821A, is the movement is unidirectional winding. The rotor has to spin clockwise in order to wind the movement. When the rotor spins anti-clockwise, it has negligible winding effect, and therefore the movement is inefficient. It's not as efficient as a bidirectional winding movement. So noisy rotor, inefficient because it's unidirectional winding. These are the things to consider. But on a positive note, it does have hacking, which earlier versions didn't have. But it is a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement. It's made in Japan, and it does do the job, although +20 isn't very accurate. So lastly, I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch meets two criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So €167 is the price point of this piece. I'm going to declare it okay quality, and I'm going to declare it poor value. The reason why I say it's poor value is because there are clear cost-cutting measures. The worst of the cost-cutting measures are the use of hardlex without AR coating. At €167, it is wholly unacceptable to be using a hardlex crystal with no AR coating. It should have sapphire crystal with AR coating at this price point. The other main negative is the poor quality use of green luminova. This clearly isn't C3 superluminova, and as I demonstrated in the lume test, it was particularly disappointing on the applied indices because they immediately faded to nothing, and even initially they didn't glow very brightly. This really should have C3 superluminova, or alternatively BGW9 superluminova at €167. It is wholly unacceptable to be using luminova at €167. So two major cost-cutting measures. The use of the 821A is acceptable, but again, at €167, I would prefer to see a higher grade of Miyota movements, such as the 9039 or alternatively the 9015, which are premium Miyota movements. And at €167, that is the price point that one starts to see 9000 series Miyota movements used. Really anything above €150, one can expect to see a 9015 or a 9039. Using the 821A, although it's decorated, it's a decorated version of the 8215, it is a base model of movements. It's one of the basic Miyota 8000 series, so it's okay, it does the job, but at 167, really they're pushing the price point for the quality of the specification. 50 metres is okay, but again I would prefer to see a screw-down crown rather than a push-pull crown, and 100 metres. But however, one has to expect some cost-cutting measures at this price point. So okay quality but poor value. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Starking AM0385. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.